He thought it was just another hike, until he found footprints no human and no animal could have made. That's when he realized something in those woods was watching him, and it was closer than he ever imagined. Subscribe for the full story, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Ethan Crowley had spent most of his life believing he understood silence. The silence after the last gunshot in a standoff. The silence in a hospital waiting room at 3 a.m. The silence of a rural highway where nothing moved for miles. But the silence in the woods of Pine Hollow that late October morning was something else, something wrong. It felt constructed, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. He stepped out of his cabin and pulled his jacket tight against the chill. The thermometer nailed to the porch read 38 degrees, typical for northern Arkansas in late fall. A thin smoke trail rose from the metal chimney pipe, carrying the scent of last night's hickory logs. Everything around him, the pines, the empty yard, the gravel road, looked exactly as it had for years. And yet something felt different. A small, instinctive warning, the kind that used to keep him alive back when he wore a badge. He locked the cabin door behind him and slung his pack over one shoulder, the motion automatic. His boots crunched softly on the frosted needles as he crossed the clearing and entered the high timberline that bordered his property. Up above, the sky was a washed-out shade of silver, already promising rain. Ethan paused at the first rise. Normally, the woods here were alive with sound crows complaining about their own existence, squirrels darting up trunks, wind whispering through the treetops. But today, nothing. Not even a single jay-call. No rustle. No crack of distant movement. Just an unnatural blanket of stillness. He checked the old lever action he carried when hiking this far from the road, not because he expected trouble, but because Pine Hollow had taught him never to be careless. The forest had a way of reminding people it didn't belong to them. A faint wind stirred, carrying the smell of damp soil and something else, something metallic, faint, but unmistakable. Blood. Ethan frowned and followed the scent up the slope. The western part of the grounds had always been odd territory. Hunters in town used to say that the animals avoided it. Some called it cursed. Others said the soil was wrong. He'd never believed in superstition, but after losing his wife to an aneurysm and his daughter to disappearance, faith and logic had both become strangers to him. He'd chosen this cabin for a reason. Quiet, isolation, the chance to stop answering questions no one would ever answer for him. But today, the woods were not quiet. They were listening. He moved deeper into the timber, noticing the first sign 10 minutes later. A branch 7 feet off the ground, snapped clean in half. Not chewed, not weather-cracked. Snapped. His eyes narrowed. Whatever did, that wasn't small. He crouched, studying the ground. The soil here was damp from last night's drizzle, soft enough to take impressions. For a moment, he didn't see anything unusual, just the subtle depressions of deer hooves further down the slope, and then he saw it. A footprint. He froze. The print was enormous, at least 15, maybe 16 inches long. Too long for a human, too narrow for a black bear. And the toes. 5 of them, distinct, human-like but far broader. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. What in God's name? He wasn't a man who scared easily. 20 years of law enforcement had hardened him in ways he wished it hadn't. But this stirred something deep and old inside him, something that whispered, "Turn back." He rose, scanning the woods. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. He followed cautiously. For the next 40 minutes, he moved along the faint path the prints created. The stride length was massive, each step nearly 5 feet apart. Twigs had been crushed under incredible weight. Bark had been scraped from trees at chest height. He found no tracks of pursuit, no drag marks, no sign of an animal fight. But then he noticed something far more disturbing. Blood. Not much at first, just a few drops on the leaves, darkened and half-dried, but fresh enough that the edges still glistened. The droplets grew more frequent as he went, dotting the moss in uneven intervals. Something had been wounded, and badly. The forest tightened around him the deeper he went. Pines crowded the trail. The canopy thickened until the light dimmed into a perpetual half-shadow. It felt like a place the sun avoided, a place the world had forgotten. Ethan's breath came out in small, visible puffs as he climbed the last rise and reached a small plateau of sandstone boulders. He paused, unslinging his pack. The blood smell was stronger here. A crow feather lay on a rock near his foot, an odd detail, considering he hadn't heard a single bird since sunrise. He stepped forward. That's when he saw the hollow. Two massive stones leaned against each other, forming a natural overhang, almost like the entrance to a shelter. The ground around it was disturbed, flattened grass, broken twigs, dark stains trailing toward the opening. Ethan approached cautiously, and then he saw it. A shape lay half inside the shadowed overhang, too large to be human, too massive to be any animal native to Arkansas. A thick arm, if it could be called an arm, rested limply against the earth. Long strands of tangled gray hair covered its torso, matted with dirt and dried blood. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Ethan's first instinct was denial. He blinked hard. But the shape didn't change. This wasn't a bear, not an elk, not anything he had ever seen in the woods during his years as sheriff. This was something else, something impossible, something the world had whispered about for decades, but never proved. Ethan's voice caught in his throat. Oh, hell. The creature shifted slightly, a low groan slipping from its throat, a sound that reverberated through the rock, through the ground, through Ethan's ribs, not aggressive, not threatening, just agony. He stepped closer, hand unconsciously resting near his holster. The creature didn't move except to breathe. It had a face. Partially hidden under coarse hair, the features were unmistakably humanoid broad cheekbones, a large brow ridge, a square jaw. Eyes closed. Skin beneath the fur an ashen tone. Ethan stared, rooted to the ground. 100 thoughts collided in his mind, each louder than the last. This can't be real. Someone must be hoaxing this. What if it's dangerous? What if it isn't? And then something else, something deeper, from the part of him that once pulled victims out of wrecked cars and held dying men's hands so they wouldn't die alone. Something that whispered, "It's suffering." Ethan took a cautious step closer. "Hey," he said softly, unsure if he expected a response. "Can you hear me?" The creature's chest hitched. It opened its eyes. Not fully, just the barest sliver, but enough. Amber-brown irises locked onto him, ancient and aware. Ethan flinched at the shock of it. These eyes weren't animal eyes. There was pain in them, fear, and something he could only interpret as recognition, as if the creature had been waiting for someone. Ethan swallowed hard. "It's okay," he murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature blinked slowly, as if trying to speak without words. Then its gaze flicked past him, over his shoulder, to the trees behind. Ethan froze. The forest remained still. But the creature exhaled a harsh, trembling whisper. "Back. Coming back." The voice was cracked, barely audible. Somewhere between a deep whisper and a gravel scrape. Ethan felt it more than heard it. He leaned closer, pulse hammering. "What's coming back?" The creature's lips moved again, struggling for breath. "Don't let them take the others." Ethan's skin prickled with cold, crawling dread. Before he could ask anything else, the creature lifted one hand, large enough to wrap around a dinner plate, and revealed something clutched in its palm. A small wooden amulet on a torn leather cord. The wood was carved with narrow runes, etched deeply and precisely, smooth from years of handling. Ethan had never seen symbols like these. They didn't look decorative. They looked like something ancient, something with purpose. The creature placed the amulet weakly on Ethan's knee. Then its head fell back. Its breathing grew shallow. Ethan felt a surge of helpless frustration. He reached into his pack, pulled out the emergency blanket he kept for hypothermia cases, and draped it gently over the creature's torso. It wasn't enough. It couldn't be enough. But he couldn't just watch it die alone. As he adjusted the blanket, something flickered across the far edge of the clearing. A faint red light. A moving dot of color. Ethan's heartbeat stumbled. It slid across a boulder, small and focused, a targeting laser. His instincts roared to life. Someone was watching him. Someone had been following the creature. Someone was here right now. Ethan lowered his head, pretending not to notice, eyes flicking toward the tree line. Another glint. Metal. A brief movement. Then silence again. The creature lay still beside him, barely breathing, its hand slack and cold around where it had curled. Ethan tightened his jaw. Someone was tracking this being, and they weren't here to help. Slowly, quietly, he slid the amulet into his pocket and rose from the ground, positioning himself between the creature and the unseen watcher. He stared into the trees, feeling the weight of a decision he didn't yet understand. Behind him, the creature exhaled a final shaky breath, whispering something he could barely catch. Others. Then silence. A silence more final than anything he'd heard in years. Ethan's chest tightened, and somewhere beyond the clearing, a distant sound cut through the stillness, the harsh buzz of a chainsaw, followed by an abrupt, unnatural stop. Someone else was in Pine Hollow, someone who didn't care who or what they hurt. The red laser dot returned this time, resting for a moment on the rock just inches from Ethan's boot. He didn't move. But inside, something in him shifted, an old part of him waking up, the part that ran toward trouble instead of away from it. Whatever game was being played here, he was already involved, and whoever the enemies were, they were close. Too close. The woods no longer felt like a sanctuary. They felt like a trap. And Ethan Crowley had just stepped into the center of it. The woods swallowed Ethan the moment he stepped away from the hollow. The silence that had haunted him earlier now felt sharper, stretched thin like a wire about to snap. The forest no longer merely watched. It followed. Every instinct he'd once relied on as sheriff, the instincts he'd buried under grief, rose again, vivid and unwelcome. He moved low, keeping to the darkest shadows beneath the pines, ears attuned to anything beyond the wind. The memory of that red laser dot burned in his mind. Someone had a line of sight on the hollow. Someone armed, strategic, patient. And whoever they were, they hadn't revealed themselves, which meant they weren't afraid of him. Not even a little. He descended the ridge, boots finding familiar footholds along the shale slope. The amulet in his pocket felt heavier with every step, as if it carried more weight than simple carved wood. The dying creature's final words echoed with each breath. Don't let them take the others. Others. Plural. He wasn't sure which scared him more, the fact that there might be more of those beings, or the possibility that someone out there knew about them long before he did. When he reached the base of the ridge, the first sound broke the oppressive quiet. A faint metallic crackle. Radio static. Ethan froze mid-step. Another burst of static. Very soft. Then a voice distorted, clipped. Sector C. Tracks confirmed. Target wounded. Keep thermal on grid. Ethan pressed himself behind a fir trunk, pulse drumming. The voices were close, no more than 100 yards, moving parallel to him. Another voice joined the channel, deeper, more controlled. Team Delta, do not fire until visual confirmation. We need specimen intact. Director Holt wants a live capture this time. A chill crept up Ethan's spine. Specimen. Live capture. This wasn't a wildlife search. This was an operation. He listened harder. Footsteps on dry leaves, the soft whir of a drone rotating above the treetops, and the unmistakable electronic hum of thermal gear. Helix Frontier Research. Maeve would name them later. But Ethan already sensed the caliber of their organization. This was no weekend expedition, no amateur cryptid hunters. This was a paramilitary team. He waited until their steps faded, before heading down the narrow canyon trail that wound toward Pine Hollow. The route was steep but shielded from aerial view. Good. He needed shadows. The amulet kept knocking against his thigh with each stride. Those runes, that dying voice, that laser dot. What the hell had he walked into? He tightened his jaw. The creature had trusted him enough to speak, to hand him something. Ethan didn't know why. Maybe it sensed something in him. The grief carved into him like a second skeleton, something that recognized loss when it saw it. Whatever the reason, the trust meant responsibility. He pushed deeper into the canyon, mind racing, until he reached the edge of an old rusted fence, half swallowed by vines. Beyond it, a thin dirt road led toward a sagging farmhouse with peeling white paint, Maeve Redbird's place. He hadn't expected to come here. In truth, he hadn't planned anything. But instinct or fate guided his steps. Ethan lifted the latch on the gate and stepped into the yard. A dog barked from behind the house, an old hound with cloudy eyes. Before Ethan could call out, the front door opened with a slow creak. Maeve Redbird emerged, tall and slender despite her age, her long gray braid hanging past her shoulder. She wore a flannel jacket over a faded red shirt, and around her neck hung a turquoise pendant, polished to a dull shine. She looked at him as if she had been expecting him. "You came from the West Ridge," she said quietly. Ethan stopped short. "How'd you know?" Maeve's eyes, sharp, dark, perceptive, glided to the faint smear of dried dirt on his sleeve, then to the branch scratches on his jacket. "You smell of fear," she said softly, "and of something older. Something that hasn't shown itself to our kind in a very long time." Ethan swallowed. "You saw one of them," Maeve said. It wasn't a question. Ethan's breath hitched. You know about it?" She nodded slowly. "Come inside before they see you." That sentence hit him harder than any bullet ever had. Inside, Maeve's home smelled of cedarwood, herbs, and old books. Blankets hung over the windows, dimming the room to amber shadows. A kettle simmered on the stove, filling the kitchen with low, rhythmic hissing. She gestured to a chair. "Sit." He did. Maeve studied him for several long seconds. Not suspicious, not fearful, but searching. "You carry something," she murmured. "Show me." Ethan hesitated. Then, slowly, he pulled the wooden amulet from his pocket. Maeve inhaled sharply, hand trembling for the first time. "Where did you get this?" "He gave it to me," Ethan said. "Right before he died." Maeve closed her eyes. "The Hollow Kin," she whispered. "The last forest people of these mountains." Ethan's chest tightened. "They're real." "Real as the pines outside," Maeve replied. "Older than any tribe, older than the first settlers. They lived in silence, hiding, surviving. They came from a time before we divided man from nature." She touched the amulet reverently, tracing the runes. "These symbols mark kinship, trust, guidance." Ethan exhaled slowly. The weight of responsibility grew heavier. "Maeve," he said, You said before they see you. Who are they? Her jaw clenched. The ones hunting them? The men with the radios? They're not new. They've been chasing the hollow kin for years, snatching them like animals. My grandfather saw it in the 60s. White vans, men in suits, bodies that disappeared. Her voice lowered. They want their blood, their strength, the secrets their bodies carry. Ethan closed his eyes, anger rising like wildfire. They shot him, he whispered. He was wounded. Bad. Maeve nodded grimly. They don't care if the hollow kin live or die. They only care that none of them hide long enough to warn the others. Ethan froze. Others? Maeve lifted her chin. There are a few left. Not many. Families of them once lived hidden deep in the ravines. But Helix Frontier, those men out there, they've trapped most, drugged them, shipped them off in cargo containers. Her voice cracked. I've heard their cries in the wind on nights when the moon hides. Ethan felt something cold lodge beneath his ribs. The creature's last words suddenly took on terrible meaning. Don't let them take the others. Maeve poured tea into 2 cups, her hands shaking. She didn't drink her own. They'll track your scent, she said. The creature's blood is on your boots. They'll follow that. A sound outside snapped her head toward the window. An engine. Slow. Heavy. Ethan shot up. They followed me? Maeve didn't answer, but her silence was enough. Shadow moved across the frosted glass. A vehicle parking. Doors opening. Ethan hurried to the back window. A black SUV. No plates. Bulletproof windows. 2 men in tactical gear stepping out, helmets, earpieces, night vision monoculars clipped to their harnesses. One of them scanned the house with a handheld device, thermal imaging. They know someone's here, Ethan whispered. Maeve stepped beside him. They've been sweeping these woods for months. You stumbled into something they've been trying to keep buried. Then she looked at him with a sudden fierceness. But you're not running alone. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, the hound outside began barking frantically, warning, desperate barks. A 3rd man stepped out of the SUV. He aimed something small, a tranquilizer pistol, toward the dog. Ethan's pulse spiked. They'll shoot him, he said. Maeve's expression hardened. If we don't leave now, they'll shoot us. She moved quickly to the back door, grabbing a canvas bag from a hook. Come, she ordered, and stay low. They slipped out into the tree line, ducking behind a fallen log as the front door of Maeve's house shook under the forceful knock of the intruders. Clear left, one voice said. Thermal's picking movement. Might be 2 targets. Orders? Capture if possible. Use force if necessary. Ethan clenched his fists, but Maeve tugged his sleeve, pulling him deeper into the woods. We can't fight them, she whispered. Not yet. They crept along the rocks until the sound of boots and radios faded behind them. But just as Ethan began to breathe easier, he saw something ahead that made him freeze. Footprints. Huge, bare footprints. Fresh. And next to them, something smaller. Much smaller. Maeve, Ethan whispered. She followed his gaze, her breath caught. A mother, she said. And her child. The tracks led toward a ravine. They followed quietly, fear mounting with every step, until they reached a small clearing. There, resting against a tree trunk, was another hollow kin. She was smaller than the male Ethan had found, still massive, but leaner, covered in thick brown fur streaked with darker patches. Her breaths were uneven, labored. In her arms, barely able to lift its head, was a child. The mother's eyes widened when she saw Ethan. Fear, then recognition, then something like pleading. Maeve stepped forward slowly, hands raised. It's all right, she whispered. We're here to help. The mother shifted, shielding the child. Ethan saw pain ripple through her body. Maeve knelt, speaking in a soft cadence Ethan didn't recognize. Cherokee, maybe, or an older tongue. The mother listened. Then, with trembling effort, she extended one massive arm toward Ethan. Maeve whispered urgently, "She knows the amulet. Show her." Ethan pulled the wooden amulet from his pocket. A low, aching sound escaped the mother's throat relief. Recognition. She reached out, touching the amulet with a finger the size of a tool handle. Then she pressed her palm softly to Ethan's chest, directly over his heart. A gesture of trust. A plea. And then she laid the child in his arms. The little one trembled, weak, its breaths shallow. Its eyes round, dark, and terrified looked up into Ethan's face. Maeve's voice broke. "She's giving him to you. She can't run anymore." Ethan's hands shook as he held the child. It was warmer than he expected, its fur softer. It made a small sound, a frightened whimper that pierced him deeper than he wanted to admit. Behind them, dogs barked. Radios crackled. The hunters were closing in. The mother rose with difficulty, leaning heavily against the tree. She made a sharp sound toward Ethan, a sound of determination, not fear. And then, she turned and stepped toward the approaching danger. "What is she doing?" Ethan whispered. Maeve's voice was thick with sorrow. "She's doing what mothers do. She's buying time." Ethan clutched the child tighter as the mother vanished into the trees. Seconds later, the forest erupted with shouts, commands, barking, thuds, and then silence. A silence even heavier than before. Maeve closed her eyes. "She's gone," she whispered. Ethan felt his throat tighten painfully. The child in his arms let out another small cry, as if sensing the truth. Maeve placed a trembling hand on Ethan's shoulder. "This is no longer just about you," she said, "or even about them." Her eyes hardened. "This is war." Ethan looked down at the child, the last trace of a dying people. Then back toward the place where the mother had fallen. Something hot and fierce ignited in him. Not anger, not fear. Purpose. "Then we don't run," Ethan said. "We fight." Dawn came slowly to Pine Hollow, hesitating behind the jagged ridgeline, as if unsure whether the light was welcome here anymore. Mist clung to the ground in thin silver sheets. The world felt altered, tilted somehow, like the forest was waiting to exhale, but refused to, until it knew who would survive the day. Ethan Crowley stood at the edge of a dry creek bed, the child small, trembling, impossibly warm-held against his chest. Maeve Redbird stood beside him, scanning the tree line with a focus honed through decades of knowing when danger breathed close. Behind them, far away but getting closer, the radios crackled again. Search teams, dogs, drones. Helix Frontier was sweeping the woods with military precision, and they weren't searching for evidence anymore. They were searching for Ethan. Ethan shifted the child in his arms. The little one clung weakly to the collar of his jacket, breathing in shallow, frightened bursts. Its fingers were long and soft, but each little tremor cut him deeper than he wanted to admit. Maeve watched him, her expression both solemn and resolute. "She gave him to you," she said. "That wasn't chance. That was a choice." Ethan swallowed hard. "I'm no guardian. I'm barely holding myself together." Maeve shook her head. "You're exactly what he needs." He didn't argue. He couldn't. The child pressed its face into his chest, seeking safety. Something about that simple trust, after so much loss, hit him like a hammer. Maeve knelt beside a moss-covered stone and traced patterns in the soil with her finger. "The hunters will expect us to run north. That's where the old ravines are. But we're not taking him to any hiding place they know." "No?" Ethan asked. "We're taking him out," Maeve said. "Out of the state. Out of their reach. There's a network. People who've been fighting Helix for years. They've smuggled refugees of many kinds. They can smuggle him." Ethan tightened his grip around the child. How far is this network? Too far to walk with drones overhead, but far enough if we use the old tunnels. Ethan frowned. The mining tunnels? Maeve nodded grimly. One collapsed years ago, but the others still run beneath half the valley. They weren't on any modern maps, and Helix doesn't know this land like we do. Before Ethan could reply, the dogs barked closer now. Maeve's face hardened. It's time. They moved quickly through the underbrush, descending into the thick dark of the ravine. Fallen logs became bridges. Narrow ledges became escapes. Ethan followed Maeve's lead, trusting her knowledge, trusting her instinct, trusting anything that could help keep the child alive. Every few minutes, Ethan checked behind them, not with fear, but with the old focus he once had during hostage rescues. Helix wasn't just tracking the hollow kin, they were tracking him, and the child was the prize they wanted most. The entrance to the abandoned mine sat half hidden behind a curtain of dead vines. The wooden support beams were split with age, but the darkness beyond was intact, deep, silent, preserved. Maeve pulled aside the vines. Once we're in, they'll lose the drone's thermal read, at least for a while. Ethan stepped into the tunnel. Cold air rushed past him, carrying the scent of ancient dust and stone. The child whimpered softly, but did not resist. Maeve lit an old lantern and followed. The tunnel stretched endlessly, disappearing into blackness that swallowed the light like a hungry animal. They walked in silence, except for their breath and the faint echo of dripping water. Minutes passed, maybe hours. It was impossible to tell time underground. Maeve stopped abruptly. Ethan tensed. What is it? She pointed to the ground. Faint footprints, large ones leading deeper into the mine. A thin trail of dust had been disturbed recently. Other hollow kin were here, she whispered. Maybe days ago, maybe weeks. This was one of their escape paths. The idea spiraled through Ethan's mind. How long had they been fleeing? How many had been taken? How many were left? He didn't want to ask. He already knew the answer. Too few. They continued deeper until a low rumble vibrated through the tunnel. It was faint at first, distant, but unmistakable. Boots, rolling equipment, a motorized hum. Maeve shot Ethan a horrified look. They found the second entrance. Ethan cursed under his breath. Helix didn't need to know the tunnels intimately. They only needed enough intelligence from prior hunts to guess where the hollow kin had once hidden, and they were moving in fast. Maeve whispered urgently, "This way." She pointed toward a narrow offshoot tunnel Ethan hadn't seen, a side shaft angled downward. They squeezed through. Dust fell like ash. Rocks shifted underfoot. The child tightened its grip around Ethan's neck. Its heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird. "It's okay," Ethan whispered into its fur. "I've got you." For the first time in years, he meant it, every word. The tunnel eventually widened, opening into a larger chamber supported by old metal beams. Maeve lifted the lantern high. "Rest here," she murmured. Ethan lowered himself onto a rock ledge, holding the child close. For a moment, there was peace, even hope. Then a metallic click echoed through the chamber. A flashlight beam snapped across the rocks. A man stepped into view. Tall, clean-shaven, cold eyes, precise movements. He wore tactical gear, not like the others, sleeker, higher level, marked with a silver insignia. He raised a suppressed pistol at Ethan with casual confidence. "Ethan Crowley," he said. "Former sheriff. Daughter missing. Wife deceased. One arrest for assault. You've fallen far." Ethan slowly shifted the child behind him. "And you are?" The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Graham Holt, Command Director for Helix Frontier. The man you've been inconveniencing today." Maeve stepped forward, voice steady. Turn around, Holt. You aren't taking the child. Holt sighed, almost disappointed. You people are oddly sentimental. We are not destroying a species. We're preventing an evolutionary advantage from slipping through our fingers. Ethan glared. You're hunting them to extinction. No, Holt corrected calmly. We're collecting them. There's a difference. Their biology contains remarkable properties: regeneration, immune resilience. We intend to use these traits to cure disease. By torturing them? Maeve snapped. Holt shrugged. Progress demands sacrifice. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Holt aimed the pistol at him. But today's little interference ends right here. We don't need you alive. We only need the child. Ethan shifted subtly, adjusting his stance. The weight of the child against his side grounded him, sharpened him. Let me guess, Ethan said quietly. You took my daughter too. Holt didn't answer, which was answer enough. Ethan's throat tightened, his vision blurred. For a moment, not from fear, but from sorrow so sharp it almost staggered him. Holt lifted his chin. She had markers, he said. An affinity in her genome. We believed she might carry remnants of... But Ethan didn't hear the rest. Something inside him broke. Something old. Something that had waited too long for truth. And in the breaking came clarity. This man wasn't here to bargain. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to erase everything. Holt cocked the pistol. Maeve whispered, Ethan. And Ethan moved. What followed happened fast, too fast for fear. Just clarity, instinct, and purpose. Ethan grabbed the nearest support beam and yanked it sideways. The rusted bolt snapped with age. The tunnel ceiling roared as dust rained down. Holt fired. The shot missed by inches as the chamber shook. Maeve pulled Ethan hard toward the escape tunnel. Run! Ethan scooped the child tighter and sprinted. The chamber behind him echoed with collapsing beams, and Holt shouting orders into his radio. They ran through the side tunnel, climbing upward toward daylight. Rocks tumbled behind them. The ground quaked again, Holt's men detonating charges to force them out. Maeve reached the upper exit first, a crack of light between split boulders. Hurry! Ethan shoved the child through the gap into her waiting arms. A final detonation thundered behind him. He scrambled upward. Just as he pulled himself free, a violent tremor shook the hillside, and the tunnel mouth collapsed entirely with a deafening roar. The earth swallowed the entire lower shaft, sealing Holt and the pursuing team behind tons of stone. Maeve stared at the fallen rock, breath trembling. Ethan? Ethan didn't answer for a moment. He was staring too. The tunnel. The hunters. Holt. Gone. Not certain. Not guaranteed. But gone enough. The child trembled in Maeve's arms, letting out a soft, grieving sound no human throat could make. Ethan placed a hand gently on the little creature's back. He's safe, he whispered. We'll keep him safe. And for the first time since his daughter vanished, Ethan felt something warm break through the ice in his chest. Purpose, direction, a reason to still be here. Maeve wiped her eyes. We need to get him to the network. There's a convoy north. They're waiting at sundown. Ethan nodded. Then let's move. Hours later, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Maeve stood beside a rusted truck on an old service road. Two figures approached from the shadows, activists working underground. They took the child gently, carefully, wrapping him in blankets. He'll be safe across the border, one said. We'll protect him. The child reached one tiny hand toward Ethan, eyes shimmering with a depth of sorrow no living being should carry. Ethan swallowed, fighting the urge to take him back. You hold on, he whispered, voice rough. You survive. You grow. Maeve touched his arm. He'll remember you. They remember kindness. The vehicle drove away, disappearing into the forest roads. The faint hum faded into nothing. The clearing fell silent. Ethan stared into the emptiness, feeling a chapter of himself closing. Not the end, but the beginning of a long, fierce battle. Maeve finally spoke. "You know they won't stop. Helix won't let this go." Ethan's voice darkened. "I'm counting on it." Maeve studied him. "And what will you do now?" Ethan turned toward the dark ridge of Pine Hollow. "I'm going back," he said. "To the place I found the first one. To the place this started." Maeve hesitated. "Why?" Ethan looked at the horizon where the child had disappeared. "Because if I'm going to fight," he said quietly, "I'm going to start where they died." He adjusted his jacket and stepped into the woods. The forest swallowed him again. But this time, he didn't walk as a broken man. He walked with purpose, with fire, with a vow etched in bone. If Helix wanted a war, they had chosen the wrong man to provoke. At the ridge, Ethan paused, gazing down into the hollow where the first giant had given him the amulet, its dying trust. Something glimmered near the stones. He knelt and picked it up, a second amulet. Smaller, designed for a child, left behind, or meant for him. Ethan closed his hand around it. "I'll protect your legacy," he whispered. "All of it." The wind moved through the trees as if answering. Ethan Crowley rose and disappeared into the deepening shadows of Pine Hollow, knowing the fight had only just begun.